We started a little brand, and there's no doubt that in any startup's journey or entrepreneur's journey, I certainly believe you need a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck.
Having a goal like financially driven metrics where you know that based on a valuation, you can hit a number that's going to make you feel comfortable. And I guess that's different for everyone. Once you know that number, then you also know what you need to do in your business to get it to that point.
It was always the plan to build something that really was saleable. There was never any real requirement to build a family business or to hand down to really my kids. It was always a strategy of build it to sell it.
The goal with Exit Strategy is to create an educational platform that helps business owners and founders develop skills that will help them get their businesses sold.
All right, welcome to another episode of Exit Strategy Secrets. Joining us today is Jonni Katz, the founder of Earthchild, a beloved South African children's clothing brand. Jonni's journey with Earthchild is a remarkable tale of passion, growth, and strategic exit. In 2014, Earthchild was acquired by Truworths, a leading fashion retailer, in a move that marked a significant milestone in Jonni's entrepreneurial journey. So welcome, Jonni, to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you so much for inviting me.
So, Jonni, maybe just to kick it off, if you can just share a little bit about your background and, why did you start Earthchild in the first place?
So, Aaron, first of all, I should say that it was a long, long time ago. So thank you for having me, but my story might be a little bit out of date, but I'm happy to share it anyway. I was a student, in fact, and my older sister had a kid, and she lived in Joburg, and she was struggling to dress the child in what she thought was appropriate adult-like fashion front down for children. The market at that stage was full of very childlike brands. And she came to Cape Town and we started chatting, and she said she thinks that she would like to start a brand and possibly start by selling it to her friends, really to friends and family. I was based in Cape Town, and she asked me to do a little bit of research to find out if there were any CMT factories or any places that I could find that she could possibly make this tiny range through. And with that, as I said, I think I had actually said that I was a student. I had one more module to do to graduate with a marketing diploma. And before I knew what was what, she and I had started this business. She knew, in fact, really both of us knew absolutely nothing about fashion. She knew nothing about really designing fashion. I knew nothing about really manufacturing. And by default, we started this, we started a little brand. And we started by really selling to her friends. And then her friends told their friends. And so it grew.
Yeah, it's incredible how many businesses just start like that, without, like a real plan. It's just like a solution to your own problem. And then it kind of evolves from there. So that was in 1994, I believe. And you eventually sold the company in 2014. So that's a 20-year business building journey. What were some of the key milestones and challenges in the beginning that you faced?
So I think for the first couple years, really, we were winging it. We were learning every day. We were learning on the go. Manufacturing then was incredibly difficult. The volumes were small, and the range itself was relatively, really demanding, because the market and the CMTs and the manufacturers were not used to making what we wanted to make. We sold from a spare room in her house for many years and then progressed to what was called a studio, which was essentially a sophisticated garage. And we did that for quite a while. We then had agents. So we formed somewhat of a Tupperware structured business. We then had agents. And then in 1997, the V&A waterfront expanded. And they had approximately 1,000 applicants for about 90 line stores. And we decided to apply for a store. And I'll say that being granted a store at the V&A in 97 was a lucky break. And there's no doubt that in any startup's journey or entrepreneur's journey, I certainly believe you need a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck. And that was certainly one of our moments. We opened that store in October 97 to absolute aplomb. We had queues outside the door. And soon thereafter, we opened our second store in Johannesburg in Hyde Park, which I believe was in about the April of the following year. And we then had those two stores for about 10 years, I think, 8 or 10 years. At that stage, we either had to grow it or we had to just stagnate it. And Karen and I, my older sister, who founded the business really with me, decided to exit the business. So I bought her out and then started to grow the business soon thereafter. And between that period of, say, the first 10 years, we essentially went from 0 to 2 stores. And in the latter 10 years, we went from 2 stores to about 50 stores, 45 to 50.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting. And there must have been a point in your journey where you thought to yourself, this is a business I want to build. I can see a way to scale it. And if I remember correctly, when we had coffee, you sort of said to me that you were building it to set yourself up for an exit eventually with that in mind. So, what changed in the way that you were thinking about building the company after it became fully yours that could actually set it up for some kind of acquisition in the future?
Look, I think in fairness, actually, Karen and I always spoke about selling it. It was always the plan to build something that really was saleable. It's just that her lifestyle and her needs really changed. So I continued on the strategy that she and I had always had in mind, and that was to build something saleable. What changed, I guess, is after she exited, a year or two later, I found a very capable CFO, Jared Khan, who joined me and then became a shareholder. And Jared and I then started to really develop a detailed plan of what the sale would ultimately look like, who the ultimate buyers would probably be, and what we needed to do in order to achieve that end goal. So I think for us, we had a lot of clarity in that there was never any real requirement to build a family business or to build a business to hand down to really my kids or possibly Jared's kids, I guess. It was always a strategy of build it to sell it. And I think that worked particularly well for us because it allowed us to be razor focused.
We've recently partnered with Kaya Creative Studios, who are just helping us put this whole project together, making it seamless for us.
Partnering with Kaya really feels aligned to our mission and our integrity of our brand. They really do have a full array of podcast-related services and products. The Kaya team have the experience, they have the insights, they have the understanding and the full medium to really help a brand kind of grow.
If you're listening to the show and you're interested in starting a podcast or making it part of your branding marketing strategy, you should get in touch with Kaya. It's an excellent service. Hope to make some amazing content out there.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting move, to bring on a very smart and financially orientated person who can really understand the numbers. Because a lot of what I see in sort of small to medium businesses is that there really isn't a clear forecast, a clear roadmap where the financials are engineered in a way that it can be attractive to an acquirer. How important was that process in sort of becoming a very professionalized business and helping you guys execute a well-defined strategy?
Look, I guess what a founder has to realize is that they can't be everything to everyone. And I knew what I didn't know. And I knew that it was critical to get a financial orientated person to join me. And in our relationship, we had very clearly defined roles. Mine was much more around the brand, the personality, the aesthetic, the retail environment, the people, etc., etc. And Jared was very strong on these types of financial metrics. So there's no doubt that that as a founder who starts a business, you probably don't know exactly where your skill set lies and where your strength lies. It takes you some time to work it out. But once you've worked it out, I think it's important to recognize that, to understand what value you harness and where the weaknesses are or where the blind spots are, and then to surround yourself with people who are good at those other roles. And I think Earthchild did that quite well, not only from a FD type of perspective, but also from a creative, perspective. Designers are fairly difficult to A, find, and B, really retain. But in our genesis, we were very fortunate that we actually developed a fantastic team of incredibly competent people and people who thrived on really success. Because the other interesting thing that I can say, looking really back at it, is that success breeds more success. And as we started to grow, and as we started to open stores, and as we went from store 4 to 8 to 16 to 20 to 25, it might be challenging in terms of the growth and the quantum of certainly people, and I guess also responsibility. But as we built that exco, it became easier for me certainly to become the air hostess and not the pilot. And I think that's fairly key in any type of genesis, from founder mentality all the way through to, say, small, hopefully medium size, and then maybe large, that you got to learn where your strengths and weaknesses are and employ the right people to really help.
It sounds
Maybe
like
you want
you
to pull out the last
no,
sentence.
I was just saying, it sounds like you built a really good culture and you found really great people, which is not an easy thing to do, especially, as the business grows. How would you define the culture that you created, and what were some key elements in how you hired and found good quality people to join you on the journey?
Look, first of all, the culture, I think, was everything. Without the culture that we were able to build, and without that winning culture, I don't think we actually would have achieved anything. A. B, the people we hired were all personality A's to a certain extent. So there was a competitiveness within the organization that fueled the organization to really succeed. I actually remember on quite a few occasions I had to tell staff that they're not allowed to sleep at work. It's dangerous to actually stay there overnight, and it's unacceptable. So the culture was of really like a winning culture, competitive within the organization. So people are absolutely everything. And what was the last part of the question?
No, just the hiring, like how, like I've, obviously gone through
Yeah.
many hiring processes, and I've always found it quite like challenging from just an interview with somebody to know, how good are they going to actually be when they're in the organization. And I think it's a very unique skill. And, for people listening to this podcast, they're probably in a position going, okay, I've got this business, it's an asset. I need to bring in a leader or bring in a head of sales, or, bring in a few people so that it's not so dependent on the owner, then, and they've got to hire the right people. So I'm just curious as to what your secret sauce was in terms of finding good quality people to join the team.
Well, I think the secret sauce is that we weren't able to afford any heavy hitters. So we
Mm,
always had to actually employ people who we thought had lots of talent, but hadn't really matured as yet. And I think actually retrospectively that worked incredibly well for us. We had a young team. We were all a young team. I was young in those days. So we weren't able to pay heavy prices, heavy salaries, and in that we liked to employ candidates who were in their second jobs or third jobs, really, who were still young in their genesis, who we were then able to bring into our fold, into our thought process, and then let them fly. So
right.
I think that we got fairly lucky in that we employed the right people based on gut a lot, I guess. There's a lot of
Mm,
gut in the interview process. We didn't have multiple interview processes also. We had maybe one or two. We really went with them. And then the truth is that the culture of the organization determined whether they would stay or whether they would probably resign. Because of the culture and because of this winning way, a lot of people joined us and couldn't keep up with it.
mm,
Couldn't actually maintain the pace and somewhat left us voluntarily. So that 80-20 rule started to really pronounce itself incredibly clearly. That we became an organization in my mind of the 20 percenters.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's very powerful, because then it, like, the culture is so strong that the right people stay and the wrong people kind of just get off the bus, which is a really interesting approach. But from my understanding, it also sounds like you were very intentional about that. And when you brought people on, you trained and onboarded them into this organizational mindset, which I think is really important, for a business owner to do, is have a great sort of onboarding and framework to set up a new employee for success in that environment.
We spent a lot of time on that. Yeah, we spent a lot of time on that process. I'd say not really store staff, because that's slightly different in terms of operational staff. But certainly other staff, we spent a lot of time onboarding them and sharing our values, sharing the vision, and sharing what we wanted to ultimately become.
Mm,
I know that I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit, but the biggest challenge when I sold was actually telling these individuals and these teams that I had sold the business. Came as a tremendous shock. But I
that's
guess we will
interesting.
speak about that a little later.
So yeah, let's transition into that, because I guess that's really the meat of this conversation. When was the point when you realized, okay, I've created this asset, there's systems, there's structures, we're growing, the financial metrics make sense. I want to, like, go to market and see what the interest is. What was your, how would you describe or tell a story about that part of your journey?
Um, I guess the thought, I guess it started when we were approached. I think our first approach was in approximately 2011, 2010, 2011, when larger retailers started to court us and started to ask if it's something we would be interested in. I'd say medium size, and then the larger guys started to show interest. And at that point in time, I started to wonder if this was the right time. And the way that I approached it was I really reverse engineered it to say, how much money do I want to take out of this business? Now, that's probably not the normal, it's not the normal approach, I guess.
I think it's
And
smart.
that is probably why for I would say at least half a dozen approaches we had to turn down, and we had to say to our suitors that we're just not ready. I remember very clearly I actually had a coffee with one of them who was very confident that they were going to do a deal simply because I guess they thought that we would be so enamored by the opportunity of selling that we were going to do it. And I said to them, the truth is we aren't airborne yet. I used an analogy of an aeroplane. I said, we just on the runway and we're about to take off and we're just not ready. So he said, well, when are you going to be ready? So I said, well, maybe in a year. And a year later, had another coffee, and he said, well, you said a year, where are you at? I said, you know what, we're airborne, but we still need a little bit of altitude. Phone me in a year's time. And I guess that was the truth of it. The truth is that, as I said, that we always wanted to sell the business, but at what price? And yes, we can speak about valuations and how one actually values the business, all of those great things. But at the end of the day, I guess the guys who are selling have to say, well, what is the number that I want? What is the number that I need? And that's what I interrogated to the nth. And when the really parameters were between numbers X and Y, and that fitted into what I needed, I knew that was probably the right time to start thinking about it.
I think that's a really good insight, because I think a lot of business owners don't have that clarity. I know I certainly didn't have it. And I think, having a goal like financially driven metrics where you know that based on evaluation using some multiple in your industry, you can hit a number that's going to make you feel comfortable. And I guess that's different for everyone, depending on, if you have a family or if you want to live overseas, that's going to be different. That's a personal number. But yeah, once you know that number, then you also know, what you need to do in your business to get it to that point. And it kind of changes the dynamics of how you build your company, right?
Yeah, exactly right. I don't know if it changes actually the dynamics of how one builds the company. I think that you still endeavor to build it. Well, you certainly build it to sell it first
Mm.
and foremost. So we, as a retailer in our early days, there are always lots of opportunities to be fairly creative. But we always endeavor to build the profits and not hide the profits, which is what maybe others tend to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I knew, and I always have for certainly many years, what I required in terms of a lifestyle. So it's relatively modest. I don't really need the fancy, whatevers. So I knew what I needed in order to live a lifestyle that would satisfy me, my wife, and my 3 kids. And once I had been through that process and understood what that number looked like, and I hope I'm right, I hope I haven't undersold, but I think I am, then I knew in order to get there, I had to sell the business for X or around that number. the truth is that I didn't think I would go into a state of semi-retirement as soon as I have. My intention was to become more involved in the corporate lifestyle for a longer period of time, but that just didn't work out as per my original plan.
Yeah, I think maybe we can transition into, that phase where, okay, they came back a year later. Now the number was clearer to you, and you thought, okay, we're airborne now, and I'm ready to do to do a deal. How does that conversation transpire? And what are like the next steps? They're obviously now interested, and now they have to look at your business. You have to agree to evaluation. You have to agree to the earnout structure. Maybe you can walk us through that conversation and that process in order to actually get a signed agreement in place.
So just to clarify that the ultimate buyer wasn't really necessarily the organization I told about the not being airborne yet.
Okay.
So just for like clarity there. But I think for us, what worked really well is we got an independent third party specialist who came in and valued our business. He spent a lot of time actually with us. We developed the like deck, I guess. Really, we were very involved in that entire process, and we agreed on who his targets would be. One of a few of which was some of the organizations that had in fact approached us like previously, and we added others onto it. And we let this third party, call it a broker, we let him take the business ultimately to like in a market, and then he assessed who the interested parties were, and then we started to speak to some of those interested parties. I've only sold one like in a business, but retrospectively, without any doubt, this broker added tremendous value. And whatever he earned, which was a fee-based earning based on the ultimate sales number, was the best money I've ever paid. So the higher the price that he achieved, the more he earned. And I thought that was a great deal. I thought it really worked well for him and us. And the actual process can be incredibly difficult and very, very overwhelming. So this particular guy served not only as a business broker, but probably more of as a psychologist. Because I'm sure you actually would agree that when one's going through the selling of a business, it can be energy sapping, takes a lot of time, and it certainly can take your eye off the ball of running the business from a day-to-day type of perspective. So having a third party involved and a professional who does this every day was absolutely invaluable. The actual process of the DD and the interrogation and the paperwork and the requirements was enormous. It's enormous. It's enormously stressful. It takes a lot of time, and you've got to be extremely well prepared for it. I would say you need to plan for it, and you need to mentally prepare for it, and you need to prepare that it doesn't always work out.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think a lot of people underestimate the actual process, because once you get somebody interested, that's only like 1% of this process, right? And the due diligence is, like you say, an enormous kind of task for a business owner and for the leadership team to prepare, because whoever's going to acquire your business obviously wants to understand everything and wants to know exactly what they're acquiring and if the value makes sense. So a lot of what I talk about is how do you set up your data room early? If you plan on selling your business in 3 years' time by having a clear exit strategy, how do you start to organize your legal documents, your financials, your customer data in a way that makes it very easy to kind of hand it over to a potential acquirer in a way that allows them to do their due diligence quickly? Because one of the things that I've realized is that in a deal, you almost wanted to move as fast as possible, and that actually comes down to agreeing on price, but also terms of the engagement, and then the due diligence. So preparing for that beforehand, like you say, can have an enormous effect on actually the outcome of the process.
Yeah, it can. You see, I think where actually, we were lucky is that we ran a very organized organization. And because of this, like in a culture that I've actually spoken about, and because of, I guess, I'm a little bit OCD in certain respects, the business was well organized, financials and anything else. So whatever they had to look at was not particularly onerous to actually give them at first, like in a glance. Obviously, when they came back and they wanted to interrogate certain areas, it required a fair amount of homework and a fair amount of retrospectively maybe going back, certainly for like, certain warranties and that type of thing. But overall, we had been planning for this for a while. We then got the broker in who said, look, you're going to need X, Y, and Z. So get it ready now. That process with the broker took at least 6 months, 8 months. So when we went to market, eventually, we were completely game like, ready. So we were speaking about earlier sport. We knew we were going to go to the Euros. We knew the squad, and we knew the game plan in
And you
terms
stood
of
up
a
to take
soccer.
a penalty, and you scored it, and got through to the semis because of the
So
mental
that's
strength.
exactly right. And that particular penalty taking process is nerve-wracking. And I think most deals do have those moments of anxiety when it's on a knife's edge type of thing. I don't think we had it to that extreme, but you have to know that you're going to play a match. There might be extra time, hopefully not, but it might actually go to penalties, and that can be anxiety ridden, as we saw on Saturday evening with England.
Yeah, glad that they got a different result to the last one. But yeah, that's interesting. I guess mental health and resilience and being anti-fragile in those periods are important. How did you look after your kind of mental health during that period of time?
It's quite funny because I was part of an organization called the Entrepreneurs Organization.
Yeah.
And in our forum, we had a guy who walked into our forum once and said, let's run a marathon. Let's all run a marathon. So we said, when is the marathon? And it was the Cape Town Marathon, which I think is usually in about September. And I signed up in our forum to actually do this. I think of the 9 forum members who said we were going to endeavor to run the marathon, only 3 of us actually ran it, and I fortunately ran it. So I got into running and preparing for the marathon at exactly the same time that we were going into the final stretch of our final negotiations with Truworths. So I think that running helped me a lot, strangely enough.
Mm.
My wife might argue that she didn't have anything like that, and therefore she bore the brunt of a lot of the stress, and I think she certainly did. So I would say to anybody to speak to forewarn any partners and any family that it's a stressful process, but it's also the most enthralling process. It's also a fantastic journey. You've spent years building a business. You are now being courted by a prospective buyer. they enjoy the business. They recognize in your hard work. They recognize in everything that you've actually like achieved, and they are prepared to pay you for what you've actually built. So however stressful it may be, it's also incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a nice perspective to take. And I think, like you say, the better prepared you are for the process, the more you understand about it, which is the whole point really of this podcast, of this show, is to, give business owners the tools and also the nudge to say, if you're thinking about exiting and you want to put a strategy in place, it's going to have a better outcome, I think, in the end, which is exactly what you did. And I feel like a lot of business owners can benefit from doing a very similar process within, like you say, a business that they've spent 15 to 20 years building. They've got staff, they've got a product, it's generating profit, it's got a whole system in place, it's got value, and you can maximize that value with a good strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. I think that if one is intending to sell, you got to certainly prepare well in advance. And it's not only really the DD pertaining to financials. I think it's important for the acquirer to see all the other nuances, even if they're not going to use them. We had certainly particular things that maybe Truworths didn't. They weren't interested in or they weren't buying, but they were still important for us to harness them. Sustainability, organic, brand awareness. What does your brand stand for? All these other intangibles to a large extent add so much value to the bigger picture. So, as the business owner, I would say, yes, absolutely right. You have to look at profitability. You have to look at the balance sheet. You have to look at these really financial metrics. Have to show a lot of growth. Have to ensure that the acquirer can see a pathway to further growth, etc., etc. But don't ignore the other nuances around the fundamentals of a business. Not only because you want to ultimately sell this healthy organization, but also because it's a good thing to do as a business owner from the day you choose or you say you are going to sell until that point. It's also quite a healthy process to go through, besides the obvious,
Mm,
really financials.
agreed. Yeah, the intangible values actually are, yeah, I agree with you. A lot of what a strategic buyer is sort of acquiring, and that's why I think brand is quite an important sort of cornerstone of a company. Like, how do you stack up to the competitors, and what is that lighthouse element that you bring that makes people sort of like attracted to what you offer. And I think that's also an intentional process. Is what does your website look like? How do you speak to people? What is your customer service? Those kind of things all like add up into the brand feeling, which can have an enormous impact on how the outside world perceives you. And I think nowadays, probably even more compared to then, with the you know a lot more focus on digital, you can upgrade your brand through LinkedIn, through just a web page, through a refreshed design that can make it look much more attractive to the outside world, through an intentional process.
Absolutely. And certain industries or certain sectors are are better or easier. And we were in children's fashion. So I mean, children's fashion retrospectively was a great area, and Earthchild was a great brand to really work on those other intangibles. And we layered it quite heavily with organic, sustainable, all sorts of other things that could have added value to other buyers. Other buyers may have attributed more value to that than, say, our ultimate buyer did, for no rhyme or reason being better or worse. But you never know what your buyer's going to attribute the value to besides the obvious. And therefore, you should be acutely aware to build those other intangibles, because there may be one or two that the buyer says, oh, wow, I really love that. And I see value in that. And he may actually pay you for that. So you just don't know.
Very interesting. Okay, so now you've done the deal, you in the negotiation process, and you told me about sort of your earn out. And I think that's obviously a big part of the negotiation with the acquirer. What happened in your negotiation and your sort of earn out structure?
Aaron, I think that earnouts are a little dangerous sometimes, because the earnout can actually create a little bit of conflict between buyer and seller. But certainly in my case, there was a lot of emphasis on the earnout and what it would really look like. Fortuitously for me, the earnout didn't really materialize to the extent that we thought it would, because I was asked to actually to take responsibility for other areas within the organization, and that mitigated my earnout risk to a large extent.
Hmm. So, Johnny, reflecting back on the whole process, is there anything that you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Look, Aaron, for me, it worked well. I can honestly say that a couple years after the sell, and being where I am now, I wouldn't change anything. And I say that for a few reasons. First of all, one has to understand that you sell in a business that one has founded, and you have to let go. If you're not able to let go and release the business, similarly to really like a kid, I guess, um, then you're always going to be watching, and you're always going to be monitoring, and you're always going to be aware of it. I don't have that. I watch Earthchild with a lot of interest. I'm very proud of Earthchild, but I'm also very happy that Truworths have done very well with it. They have grown the business tremendously, and everyone's pleased. So, would I do anything differently, really? The truth is that I'm not sure I would do that much differently. I think we were quite strategic in our planning, so I wouldn't change that. We knew that we wanted to sell it, so we grew it in order to sell it. The broker I used, I think, is a rock star, and I wouldn't have changed that process. He championed a very difficult journey, a very stressful time, and he was invaluable. Um, the business that I sold it to, being Truworths, I wouldn't change. I enjoyed my time there thoroughly. I enjoyed working with the CEO there, Michael Mark. He was fantastic. Um, I probably thought at that stage that I was going to stay there longer. What would I change? I was probably naive in terms of my ability to fit into a corporate structure. Having started Earthchild, Earthchild was my first job. As I said, I was a student, and I started Earthchild with my older sister, Karen. So I'd never had a boss. But I think that they were very aware of that, and they were very sensitive to it. Retrospectively, I wouldn't change much, except the fact that I was naive in thinking that I would stay in a corporate environment for many years. It was probably more challenging than I thought it would be.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think I've heard that from quite a few people that I've spoken to. It's a big sort of adjustment to kind of go into this completely different structure. and start working on things that seem like very different to what you were doing before. And it seems like most people sort of spend up to 2 years and then kind of leave that to actually majority become sort of investors because they've obviously made an amount of money from selling their asset. They've done the earnout, and most entrepreneurs don't want to just sit around and do nothing. So the
Yeah.
sort of natural next step is to start looking for maybe businesses to invest in and other entrepreneurs to back and mentor. What have you been focusing on since then?
So I've done a fair amount of all of that. I think that one does become less relevant over time. And a lot of your listeners possibly won't know Earthchild, the Earthchild of then that it is now. It's really changed a lot. But I've invested in 2 or 3 businesses, not really startups. I'm a little bit cautious around that. But what I think I've done is I've created lifestyle investments that I hope I can add value in. Mentoring the business owners to quite a large extent. And I have actively sought to invest and spend time in businesses that I enjoy their space, but more relevant, I enjoy the people. So for me now, it's really about spending time with people that I enjoy and I think I can work with and hopefully I can add value to. So those are my key types of metrics before I really get involved. The other thing is not to do too much, not to get involved in too many businesses. So I have 3 really where I'm spending my primary focus, and then to lead a life with a semblance of balance. Because I think as a founder and a business owner who's going through the process of building a business and ultimately selling it, you do sadly lose a sense of balance. So what the sale does allow is not only financial stability, but also the ability to do things that you weren't able to do really previously.
Yeah,
So
like
I
an
think
element of
that
freedom.
definitely element of freedom. I think that life is a lot less stressful. Um, but you have to be cautious you have to be cautious, certainly at my age, not to be bored. So I think really balance is key, but also doing things that you enjoy. Because if you do that, I think that you can add value to the organization. So I'm a shareholder in 2 out of 3 organizations. The third one, I'm a non-exec, but really trying to build, trying to trying to share the lessons that I've learned and implement them in the businesses that I'm now involved with.
What are some of the key learnings that you're passing on to these businesses that you're involved in? Like when you get involved and you can like look at the 3 and see, okay, these are the things that kind of stand out that I'm sharing from my experience. What would those be?
Look, I'm fairly focused on really financials, and I'm focused on ensuring that. Um, look, I believe in certainly service excellence, whatever it is, and that will translate into profitability. So first and foremost, to ensure that whatever we do fantastically well. If it's servicing a client, if it's selling a plate of food, whatever it is, to ensure that whatever we do well and we do better than anyone else within the industry. If we do that as well as we possibly can in a cost-effective manner, the profit will certainly follow. So the businesses that I'm really working with have got excellent products, but we need to now ensure that that translates into excellent profits. Um, but I do believe the genesis of any successful business, certainly Earthchild, we didn't look at the profit for many years. We only looked at making outstanding children's clothing. Make children's wear that is of an outstanding quality, aesthetically pleasing, etc., etc. Do what you do better than anyone else, and the money should follow in time.
Mm.
And that proved to work for us, certainly with Earthchild. I mean, I'm completely simplifying it because I could actually bore you with hours and hours of stories of how we actually got there. But in its
Mm.
simplest form, do whatever you do well and let the profit follow you, but always be acutely aware of it and watch the overhead, watch whatever needs to be really focused on.
Yeah, I think listening to you, my biggest takeaway is I'm sort of a creative entrepreneur, so I love building things, and my desire is always to do something new, and I kind of like focus on a new shiny object. And what I've learned over the last 10 years of operating that way is actually, the more value you create in the asset, the more focused you become on exactly what you're saying, which is delivering an excellent service in a market with a product you believe can serve your customer, and then just keep doing that at the highest level and managing your overheads and then building a good culture. I was sort of guilty of trying too many things and doing new things to the point where the team gets confused sometimes as to
Mm,
what are we actually doing. And so
mm,
that has been like, such an amazing part of your process is that laser focus. That's what I'm taking away from this, is that laser focus on having a clear strategy, keeping disciplined, building a winning culture, and not almost taking that flight path directly to its destination, which
mm,
I think you've done in such a tremendous way, and it's really inspiring to listen to your story, and
mm.
I think a lot of business owners can benefit from that laser focus takeaway from this episode.
Yeah, I think that it's very easy to be seduced into
Mm.
other areas. But I think once you've chosen your path, and obviously you can't be overtly rigid. So you have to have a little bit of ability to possibly pivot if and when needed. But once you've chosen your primary strategy, I think it's absolutely right. And I think that the role that I play in the businesses that I'm actually now part of is to keep the business on a fairly tight pathway, and to ensure that we really deliver service excellence, and
Mm.
profits will follow in time if they aren't there already, type of thing.
Mm. Well, Johnny, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through your journey today. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate you sharing with this community. Um, so yeah, I look forward to getting some feedback, and I look forward to having another coffee and a arugula with you. Is that what you call them, arugulas?
You do
Yeah,
regular, yes. A
arugulas.
Klinsky's regular. That's right.
Klinsky's arugula is honestly, sometimes I go to bed, dreaming about them. But yeah, thank you again for your time today. And that's the wrap for the show.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you.